Hi, and welcome to the Mavericks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Roy, and this is the place to be to get unstuck, unleash your superpowers, and create a world that works for all. On this podcast, we speak to Mavericks who inspire us. We aim to get the insight and wisdom from their story to help get you the clarity, courage, and conviction that you need to make your mark on the world. Our guest this week is Dr. David Hamilton. David is a speaker and author in the realm of neuroscience, the mind-body connection, and spirituality. David is an organic chemist who spent 4 years in the pharmaceutical industry before following his heart to write his first book. He's since written 10 best-selling books and uses science to inspire thousands in his talks. What I love about David is that he's genuinely inspired by science. He passionately shares things like the science of why kindness is good for you. David is a lovely man, grounded, humble, and extremely human. He's a great example of someone following their heart to find their passion. So, let's get to it. So hi Mavericks, it's Chris here again with the Mavericks Unlimited podcast, and we have, I feel like at the beginning of every podcast I say we have a really special guest, but this week I really feel it. We have one of my favourite authors in the UK, Dr. David Hamilton, who is one of the biggest names in kind of the realms of self-development, personal development, science and spirituality, and he's just inspired me and countless thousands of others. David's mission is to use science to inspire, and I think that's certainly true, and I think he's done that a lot. So David, hi, welcome. Thank you so much for being on here.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It's great to be here chatting with you.
It's just really a privilege and a pleasure. So, David, for those of our listeners out there that have heard of you, they'll know of your work, but for those that haven't, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to in the world?
Well, I am a writer and speaker, former scientist in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm an organic chemist by training.
Wow.
Which nothing to do with organic food. It's like the way kids play with Lego bricks to build objects. So an organic chemist does exactly the same, but our Lego bricks are atoms like carbons, hydrogens, nitrogens, and oxygens, and
right.
so we build molecules. And people like me tend to, unless you go into academia, people like me tend to end up in the pharmaceutical industry building drugs for disease. So I was working on heart disease and cancer.
Right. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so, but I was more interested in the placebo effect because I thought that was so fascinating, why so many people were making improvements on sugar pills. So I started to look into that while I was working as a mainstream scientist. I was looking into what is it that causes, what is it that happens in the body and in the brain when someone believes something. And that was so amazing what I uncovered that I left the job and started writing books and teaching on harnessing mind and emotions for it to improve our health.
Wow. So how long were you in kind of the mainstream, as it were, before you went off and
well, if you include the university time, my honours degree was 4 years and 3 years PhD, and then I worked for 4 years in the pharmaceutical industry. So if you just include the pharmaceutical industry, 4 years, but if you include the whole science training part of it, then 15 years.
So that's a huge grounding in science. And I mean, we're not just talking science here, we're talking chemistry. And as you say, all the building blocks and all that kind of stuff. So what was it that you started digging up and uncovering that kind of inspired you so much?
Well, I just wondered, it's easy to dismiss the placebo effect as all in the mind. And that's a standard line. And when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, that was a standard, it was dismissed as it's all in the mind. But that's not because people dismissing are experts on it. It's just because that's what other people say. and it's so true, actually. I mean, none of my colleagues at the time had any interest in it because, we're making medicines and it wasn't their interest. So anyone I spoke to about it was, it's all in the mind. It's just the placebo effect. But when I started to look at results of clinical trials and see how common it was, and then start looking in at some other scientific evidence for the mind-body connection, it was very obvious to me that something was actually happening more than just all in. There's no such thing as all in the mind. What you think and what you believe actually shifts the biology of your brain and body moment by moment. In fact, your heart, your blood vessels, your brain, your immune system is literally moving in varying directions all throughout the day according to where your mind is. And that is astonishing, but it's not something that I was trained in, nor any of my colleagues. So I just found it interesting. And also there was enough people in the pharmaceutical industry making medicines, and this was my belief, that I think I could do more good if I could educate people on how to use their mind and emotions to their benefit. I didn't think I would be missed, if you like, in the pharmaceutical. There's enough people like me, enough organic chemists like me. I thought I could make more good in the world if I went independent on the mind-body connection and that broader subject.
So, I mean, I think it's fair to say you've definitely had an impact on the world, as it were. So, when you left and you kind of started down the journey of the mind-body connection, what's your journey since then been like?
It's been one of ups and downs. I would say. First of all, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing.
Right. Okay.
No idea what I was doing or how to do it. I just had a good idea. It was like I just knew in my heart. In fact, I was at a Tony Robbins seminar. You know, the big giant American. Yeah. Cardiff, Unleash the Power Within, 1999, and Tony did this big visualization when he made it was like 2 hours long or something.
Oh,
and at one
God.
point, yeah, amazing. And at one point, he got us thinking of times in our lives when something happened. Had it not happened that way, then life might have taken a different path. And I could think of particular times in my life where if such and such a thing hadn't happened, then my life might have gone in a different direction. He said, now make a decision that will change the course of your life. And immediately, all these thoughts I had of one day I would like to be a teacher and a writer, even though I'd failed my English at school, but it just felt like the right thing. It was I'd always had this dream, one day I will do such and such, but that one day doesn't happen unless you do something about it. Most of the time, unless circumstances sometimes happen for you, but oftentimes you have to make it happen. And during that visualization, I thought, that's it. I'm leaving my job. I'm going to, all these hopes and dreams I thought that were just in the future felt like a good thing. Damn it, I'm going to do that now. And I did, but I didn't really know what I was doing,
Right.
So within a year of leaving the job, I was absolutely broke. And no one was coming to my talks and workshops because no one knew who I was. I didn't have a website. I lacked confidence, to be really honest with you.
Right.
And I just had no idea what I was doing. And so it's been an interesting journey to get to where I am now, of just, perseverance really and trial and error.
Sure. So that being the case, what have been some of the highs and what have been some of the lows across the years?
I'd say the lows were, one of the lows actually was going bankrupt, because I was absolutely broke and in debt. What happened is some friends and I had set up a charity together,
right.
And the charity grew in size and influence fairly quickly. And I was one of the directors, one of the main people. There was half dozen of us or so, but I was one of the main directors, guiders of it. And it consumed all of my time, and I couldn't leave because if it was a difficult space to be in, because if I left, I think the whole thing would have fell apart. I was like the glue that was holding it together. And if I had left, I think it might not have kept going at the time. It may have done, but it didn't look like it could have. And so I had no money, and I was building up debt, and I couldn't pay it back. And then it just became overwhelming. And then at one point, I remember the stress of being chased by what I felt were unethical debt collectors. Like banks sell debt onto debt collectors, and then some of them were, I remember coming off the phone thinking that person has no soul.
Wow.
It's not a nice, I would not ever like to be that kind of person, untrustworthy, who lies on the phone and stuff, and made threats to phone my mum, made threats to my mum and stuff.
Oh, God.
It was all within the legal system as well. I remember that they would phone my mum and say, we're coming to take all your furniture, even though it's nothing to do with my mum and stuff. And my mum panicked and my mum had a history of panic attacks and all that, and I had to go to Citizens Advice, and they said, look, the only thing you can do is, if you're not able to pay this back, or even, make payments, the only way to protect yourself from these is to declare bankruptcy. And that's what happened. And that was a real low point for me.
Wow.
Because there's so many spiritual struggles I had with that whole thing.
Yeah, of course.
That was a real low point. It took me a while, a good year of soul searching before I was really able, I was signing on the dole after that for a while. And I got to the point where I didn't feel like anyone would notice if I wasn't here. I felt like I wasn't contributing to the world. I remember applying for a whole bunch of jobs. I remember sending out like 30 applications, 30 CVs, and I didn't even get a single response. It wasn't like I got, didn't make an interview. I actually didn't get a single response. And that confirmed to me that no one would care if I wasn't here. I felt like I wasn't contributing anything.
That's incredible. Wow.
And it was a really tough year for me. And during that time, I started working on my first book. I thought, well, this is what I left the pharmaceutical industry to do. And so that's what I'm going to do. So I started writing my first book during that time. And then as I really dived into the book, then everything began to change. It's almost like I was fulfilling a sense of purpose that I'd almost forgotten about in the whole charity work and the bankruptcy stuff. I'd almost forgotten that sense of meaning and purpose I had. And that's what brought me out of that difficult period of my time. And then the high for me was when I self-published my first book. That was the first major high a couple of years later, when I had it in my hands. And I thought, this is why I left the pharmaceutical industry, to produce this and then begin to teach.
Awesome. Yeah. Wow. Talk about a low to a high. That's incredible.
Yeah. I think that's the first time I've ever shared that publicly, Chris.
Well, I really, and to be honest, David, as I sit here listening to it, it's like, obviously for a lot of people in kind of your position, people, your people look up to you and that kind of stuff. And I think people can often forget that, people such as yourself are human and have had a journey. And I just really appreciate that, the level of honesty that you brought there. I'm really quite touched by that.
Oh,
what was it that during that kind of year of soul searching and that kind of stuff, what was it that kind of kept you going, as it were? Because that's a tough place to be, and a lot of people will relate, I'm sure.
It was the joy of writing my book, and I wrote a lot of it in coffee. I started going to coffee shops, and I thought, I just love this environment, just sitting in a coffee shop. And particularly coffee shops and bookshops. Like I used to sit in Waterstones and Borders before Borders.
Oh, I love Borders.
Yeah. So I used to sit, because Waterstones always had Costa and Borders had a Starbucks. And I used to flip between the two. I used to go to Glasgow or Edinburgh because I was living up in Scotland at the time, and other places. And I just loved that feeling of being around books and then writing my own, enjoying the taste of the coffee. And I was such pleasure, real connection I felt in this environment with books around me. And I'm writing a book, and it just felt home to me. And it didn't matter. During those times, it wouldn't have mattered if there was an end product of a book. It didn't matter. What I just enjoyed was those moments doing that. That for me was the end product, and the end product was every day for me. It was just that sheer joy and pleasure of working on my laptop and doing some edits and typing more stuff, and also I had also in the middle, I did a lot of the work in the middle of the night as well. I found total stillness in the middle of the night. Between 11:30 and 3:30 in the morning, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, I would get the laptop out, put a candle burning and some coffee, and I felt really still and connected, and I'd do that as well.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that joy of doing what I felt I was supposed to do. And I've noticed that whenever I deviate from what I feel in my heart I'm supposed to do, that's when things get difficult. And things only begin to flow properly when I bring myself back to doing what I feel in my heart I'm supposed to do.
Wow.
And it's not that life doesn't have problems and challenges.
No, of course.
It does, but there's something, there's a sense of connection inside of you from fulfilling that sense of purpose that's so powerful that you find a way through some of the difficult times, where without that sense of connection, you might not have the inner resources to find your way through the difficult times.
Absolutely. It's almost like it kind of ups the ante for you, isn't it? It's
yeah. So I've noticed that time and time again when I come back to doing what's really important, even if it doesn't seem like on the surface it is the right thing to do. It always is the right thing to do because it's who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally get that. And it's funny, the connection with like the books and the coffee shop and all that kind of thing. I remember I had a real low point around 2001. I'd just come back from the US and a Borders with a Starbucks had just opened up in Essex where I was living at the time. And I went there like 4 or 5 days a week working and all that kind of, and in the end, one of the managers came up and said, "You're spending so much time here. Do you just want to like be paid for it and come and work here," kind of thing? So I totally relate to that. Totally relate to that. So thank you for your honesty. That was amazing. And you've published, is it 9 books that are published now?
9, yeah.
9 books and a 10th in the works, and a second edition of your biggest selling book next year, as it were. Yeah. So looking at kind of where you're at now then, because I mean, obviously that was then, this is now. I know you have a grueling travel schedule, that kind of stuff. What kind of routines and practices and self-care do you have in place to kind of make sure that you're in good condition, as it were?
Quite a few things, actually. I play a lot of tennis, and that's really good for me. It's good for the exercise, the enjoyment of improving, of feeling like I'm improving, and also the social contact of it. I live in a town called Dunblane, famous for 2 opposite things. One was the school shooting a number of years ago, and the other for Andy and Jamie Murray, tennis players. And so I play at Dunblane Tennis Club in the leagues. I've only been playing a year and a half, but I've improved a lot because I brought science to it, you see.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I've broken down the videos of watching videos of Andy Murray serving, and I've broken it down so much and watched it hundreds of times that I run a program of Andy Murray serving in my head when I close my eyes. So doing that visualization, if you like, has incredibly improved my serve, because the tennis serve is apparently in sports, it's the second most technically difficult thing to get right. Well, second only to the pole vault.
Wow, well that really says something. And
so when a coach told me that, I thought, well, here we go, I'm going to bring some science to this. And
I love that. Brilliant.
And so my serve has improved so much that I went from officially the second worst tennis player in Dunblane, meaning I was second bottom of the 4th division, to now I've been promoted to the 3rd division.
Yay!
So, and the only thing that changed really was the quality of my serve, but just by watching this Andy Murray video and breaking it down and visualizing it over and over and over again.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that certainly brings the scientific method into sports practice. I love that. So playing tennis, is there anything else that you do?
Yeah, a couple of things. I like to meditate. I have my own kind of meditation practices, which are similar and different, I guess, to other standard ones. And also, I like to read kind of novels just to quiet my mind down. And I like to take a wee bit of time to. It's important to me to have that off time where I can just sit back in a chair and read a book that's got nothing to do with anything I'm doing as a writer, but it's just stuff that I find just a nice story, and that keeps my mind quiet.
What kind of stuff do you read?
Kind of science fiction and magic.
Yay!
I love the Harry Potter books. I've just read the new Philip Pullman book, The Book of Dust.
A Book of Dust, yeah.
Oh, amazing. And I've read all the Harry Potters. I like that type of, magic and fantasy. And my good friend, Glenn Hall, is working on a trilogy, and he's a great writer. His first book came out earlier in the year, and he's working on his second. So the first book, The Fall, and it's a lovely trilogy, and it's my kind of stuff. So I enjoy that
Brilliant.
kind of stuff as well.
I'll have to check it out. I'll absolutely have to check it out. That's amazing. Okay, so that's kind of how you keep yourself in shape. Another place I'm interested, just in terms of practices or that kind of stuff, is those times. Let's face it, we all have those times when we get stuck, as it were. You know, it's that movement forward. And you already mentioned sometimes when you kind of go out of what you feel in your heart you should be doing, that leads to things get more difficult. But when you find you do get stuck, how do you get yourself unstuck?
Tennis helps, actually. Getting out and sometimes if I go out and play against people, you know, or go down to the club on a Wednesday night, which is Wednesday night club coaching night, and it's just that kind of interaction, that it's such a good laugh, because there's some good characters down there, and we take it seriously enough to compete, but we don't take it too serious that we have a good laugh and we banter with each other. And that helps me a lot, because it takes your mind completely, absolutely away from what you're doing. And for me, what gets me unstuck is something that takes my mind absolutely away from what I'm actually doing. You know, so exercise like that, but in a situation where there's other people there and there's banter, that for me, I've only discovered since I've been playing tennis the last year and a half, that for me I found is a very, very important thing. It's not just the tennis itself, it's the banter and the interaction with the other people.
Brilliant.
That's a great thing. I mean, there's other things I do, but I'd say that is probably the thing that works best for me at the moment.
I love that. And of course I have to ask, because I haven't really asked about the content of your work yet. Is there what's the kind of science behind that, as it were?
Oh, good question. Well, actually, it's just sometimes when you get kind of stressed or uptight about deadlines and working so many things. Like I have so many things often that I'm doing that I have to do, not just writing deadlines, but other types of articles and website stuff and email stuff and messages and social media and a whole host of other stuff that goes with being an author. And there's times when it just seems that there's too much to do and too little time. And so for me, just going off and playing some tennis, or at lunchtime, Elizabeth, my partner, and I go down at lunchtime, 3 or 4 times a week, and that's great as well, because it's fun, it's competitive, and it just completely takes my mind off of things. And so the science of that is, when your mind is so on something and you can't see the wood for the trees, if you like, then what you really have to do is get out of doing what you're doing. So take a break, go for what used to work for me is going for a run. I'd get out and I'd run.
Right.
And being kind of competitive as I am, I would always have to beat my previous times. I always had a book of my times, and I'd be trying to improve my time all the time. but that sense of determination, it's the last mile, and I thought, I've got to do that last mile in 5 minutes and 57 seconds to beat my previous time. So I'm absolutely pelting it. And I've done 3 miles already, and I'm absolutely pelting it. And I'm exhausted, but it totally takes your mind. And the science of that is, if you can't see the wood for the trees, then you've got to get completely out of doing what you're doing. I mean, completely, to a totally different thing altogether. And what that does, it gives you a whole new perspective. It changes your emotions, your feelings. And as that happens, neurologically, you activate different regions of the brain, much more creative regions of the brain, much more insightful regions of the brain that are not active when you're under pressure, meaning the work pressure. So when you completely get out of that and do something totally different, the different activated regions of the brain allow you to see things from a broader perspective, but also see things that you might not have saw in the past. And that type of thing really, really works for me.
Love it. Thank you for giving the explanation as well. I thought I haven't actually asked you any scientific questions yet. It's about time I probably should. What I also love there is I heard, and I've had the the pleasure to hear you speak as well. You kind of come alive when you talk about this stuff. I mean, your website says that you use science to inspire, but it almost sounds like the science inspires you, and then you use that to inspire other people, as it were.
It's kind of like that, actually. Yeah.
I love that. So talking about inspirations, I'm just wondering, who are your inspirations? Who are your kind of heroes, as it were, people you've looked up to?
Quite a few, actually. In my own field, I'd say the late Wayne Dyer was a big hero for me. I think when I left the pharmaceutical industry, I was so in the science, and then I used to listen to cassette tapes of Wayne Dyer when I was driving my car.
Ah, okay.
And it was amazing. I just loved he was so kind and compassionate. And that was confirmed when I met him in person. As a speaker, we have the same publisher. And I thought it was exactly what I thought he was going to be. A really lovely, beautiful, kind person.
Mm.
And listening to him in the car, every time I drove, it added that sense of love and compassion that I was looking for to put into my own writing, and just wasn't really sure what I was writing and how to do it. And listening to Wayne, it brought that into it. But so he was one of the heroes. I've had several. My mum has been a great hero for me. My mum I think, has always been my guiding hero in being kind. And then there's my partner Elizabeth. If it wasn't for Elizabeth, in the early days when I was writing my first book, I would never have been a published author. I mean, Elizabeth supported me 1,000,000%. And not once, she was doing like crappy jobs that she hated just to get wee bits of money for us, while I would sit in these coffee shops, and not once ever did she put any pressure put me under any pressure to get a job or to earn any money, but just completely supported and believed in what I was doing.
Amazing.
And that takes a special kind of person. And if it wasn't for Elizabeth doing that, I would not be a writer, where I am just now. And if I could add another hero, science-wise, there was a professor at university who helped me a lot called Peter Posson. He died a few years back. And he was a discoverer of a couple of different fields, one major field of science. And, I did my honours year project with him, and he helped me a little bit during my PhD. And he was a real maverick, if you like, because he didn't do things the same way everyone else did. And I think that's why he made such very important discoveries. There was always talk at the uni that Peter Posson should have had the Nobel Prize. And the way the Nobel Committee work is they only give 3 people the prize, and people that worked for Peter Posson at uni used to get really annoyed because one of the guys who got the Nobel Prize got it for stuff that Professor Posson discovered. And
really?
It's often the case. It's because that other guy, he contributed so much to the field that the Nobel Committee probably decided his contribution since its discovery of this substance was so brilliant that he had to get the prize. But people at the uni got really annoyed because Peter Posson was the guy who discovered it in the first place.
Wow.
But he's such a quiet man that he never said a word. He was always just focused on doing what he did. And I think amazing discoveries followed him around because of his personality. And that's what I loved about his personality. He was not one of the people saying I should have got the Nobel Prize. He was just a kind man who just got his head down and continued doing the work that inspired him. So lots of discoveries seemed to follow him. It was like people with that kind of personality and mindset who don't get embroiled in the who's right and who's wrong kind of fights and arguments, who just get their head down. He's a good person, puts his head down and does the work that inspires him. Amazing discoveries and amazing miracles follow these kind of people. And Peter Posson made so many contributions to the field of chemistry that I did my PhD in. And it was just amazing discoveries. And people said, how come Peter Posson discovers all these things? And he's not looking for it. They just follow him around because of who he is. And that, I think, was a huge inspiration for me. And that's always stuck with me. And that to a large extent has shaped the kind of science that I do and the kind of way that I do the science, and also why I don't also get embroiled in the rights and wrongs and the fights and the arguments that go on all over the world. I just get my head down and do the thing that inspires me. And I learned a lot of that from Professor Posson.
I love that. It sounds like an amazing man.
Oh, he really was. I mean, he really was an extraordinary man.
That's incredible. And what I love there is you several times you mentioned the words good, kind, compassionate. And I kind of that's kind of where I'd like to go next, if we can, because you just talked about the kind of science that you do, and the kind of science that you do is kind of obviously quite different to a lot of what people would consider mainstream, as it were, but some incredible stuff. You've written a lot about kindness, about self-love, that kind of stuff. So I'm just kind of curious, what has sort of taken you in that direction, and then maybe we can get a bit more into it.
Yeah, well, I've always had an interest, because I feel that being kind is what's going to change the world. Not necessarily the big grandiose acts, but just being a kind person. It's who you are, and therefore stuff follows you around. You impact all the time just because of the person that you are. And so that kind of thing's always inspired me. And I've always been looking for how to convince other people that that's true. I think in being, a scientist, I found science is a very good way to do that. And there's so much science out there that no one really knows about that show that, that kindness makes a big difference, not only in the world, but even to your own health. So, I mean, my book, The 5 Side Effects of Kindness, was writing about and educating people on what happens inside your body to your health, to your heart, your immune system, your aging process, your skin cells, all these things, what happens when you're being kind, and also what happens, what kind of ripple effects occur, how does the ripple effect that people talk about, that kindness is contagious, how does that work? And if you understand all this, then it brings a whole new conversation to kindness. And my belief is when you bring that new conversation about kindness and why it is so vitally important, then it begins to shape who people are. And then you find that it's not about doing the big grandiose act. We become kinder people by nature. And that's when the big changes begin to occur, because then the decisions that we make are different. They're influenced from a different space, and we think from a different space. And that's always been my philosophy on it.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So without obviously giving the complete book away, which we can't in a short interview, what are some of the kind of side impacts of being a kind person?
First of all, kindness makes you happier. And that goes without saying. I think that's most people's experience, that being kind to others makes you feel better. And there's a lot of science around that, why it is, lots of studies and stuff. So that's one. And the second one, which is so interesting, is that kindness is good for your heart. And people, that's something that really takes people by surprise. And you wonder, how is that? Well, and the reason, the how, is it's exactly the opposite to what happens when you get stressed. When you feel stressed, and I'll bring your attention to the word feel. When you feel stressed, that feeling produces in the body stress hormones. So we've all heard of adrenaline and cortisol, the classical stress hormones.
Yeah.
And those are produced because of how you feel. You feel stressed. And those substances consistently introduced to the body can have long-term effects, negative effects, like impacting your immune system, your heart, all these kind of things. So when you be kind, and that feeling that you get, scientists now call it elevation, that you get from being kind, the warmth, the satisfaction, the gratitude, the sense of connection, instead of producing stress hormones, that feeling produces two different substances. And those substances act directly on the arteries, they act directly on the immune system, they act directly on your aging processes in a number of different ways. So kindness affects the heart and the aging process and the immune system. And it all comes down to because of how it makes you feel.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that for most people is brand new information.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating, and it's so obvious, because it's the opposite from stress. It's the opposite. It's the opposite biology and physiology from what happens when you feel stressed. It's just the opposite. But it's so obvious that we have never really thought about it. So when I wrote the book, I decided to educate how that works, with the whole reason for bringing more dialogue to kindness, with the ultimate motivation that will shape the kind of people that we are in our worlds.
I love that. And what I love about reading your books, David, is you actually make the science very accessible as well, because obviously there are studies out there and all that kind of thing, and they're very, they can be difficult to consume. But like you say, with something like that, it might be obvious, but it's wonderful to have the understanding of why it has the impact it has.
Yeah.
And obviously it gives it kind of a level of credibility that our kind of, I don't know, our kind of fact-obsessed world kind of craves or looks for, I guess.
Yeah.
And it also gives it a kind of a grounding. One of the other subjects you've written a lot about, which I really love, is around self-love. And obviously self-love is, you hear that, and a lot of people out there, especially, a lot of the business types and all that, will think, well, is that a bit namby-pamby, or is that, or I don't have time for myself, or that kind of thing. But what would you say, what's kind of some of your discoveries around kind of the impact of actually taking the time to kind of build that self-love, as it were?
For me, learning self-love has had one of probably the biggest, if not the biggest, impact on my life. And when I say self-love, what I'm referring to is inner self-esteem. It's the inner sense of worthiness and value. We talk about, there's two kinds of self-esteem, and most people don't realize there's two kinds. There's the external self-esteem, which is when your sense of worth is built upon successes and achievements in life and good things happening and people having a positive perception of you. That's external self-esteem. If that's the only self-esteem a person has, then, as they say in Scotland, your coat's on a shaky nail. Because all you need is for something to go wrong, opinion to change, and then you suffer greatly. And so life becomes like up on the crest and the trough of a wave, like a little boat on the river going up and down according to what's happening outside of you. But then you have the inner self-esteem, which is what I call self-love. It's the inner sense of worthiness and value, which is broader and it's much more powerful because it's an inner resource. And when you have that inner resource, then it doesn't mean that things don't happen in the world, as I've said earlier. It just gives you an extra resource that it buffers some of the waves, if you like. It buffers some of the challenges, and that you don't suffer so much when challenging things happen. You don't take things quite so personally. It doesn't mean you don't want people to like you. That's human nature, to want to connect with each other. That's human nature. But your happiness and sense of worth isn't dependent upon that, whether people like you or accept you. You have a different inner guiding thing. And for me, learning that was a huge thing. And then learning practical techniques for doing that for me was initially a 2-year journey, which is still ongoing. But when I wrote the book, I Heart Me, it was really my journey of learning how to love myself during that time. And it was the longest I'd ever taken to write a book, because you can't write about self-love unless you really know what you're talking about. Because I did submit an early version to the book that my publisher kindly rejected because it was awful. And all credit to Hay House Publishers, having Michelle Pilley, the MD of Hay House in the UK, having the courage to say what she did to me, that because she said, we can't publish the book as it is. It would be damaging to your career, is what she said.
Wow.
It was very weak and intellectual. And so Michelle encouraged me to take as long as I needed to really dive into it and learn it and explore the subject myself. And that's what I had to do. And I took another 1.5 years to really go into it and really feel the feelings and develop a lot of techniques and strategies based on science that anyone could use and apply. And for me, that was life-changing for me, actually. I'd say I grew more as a person in my personal development in that 2-year period than probably the previous 15 years.
Wow. Well,
just from learning how to love myself. Because self-love impacts just about everything in your life. It impacts how you feel. It impacts your relationships, your finances, your career, your mental and emotional health. I mean, almost everything on your external experience derives or the quality of it is affected by how you really deep down feel about yourself.
Right.
Yeah. So for me, that was life-changing.
And it sounds, well, what I love there is, in a certain kind of way, you were your own experiment, as it were.
Yeah.
Which I love. So, I mean, let's kind of dig into this a little more, because this is a great subject to talk about. Because a lot of the people that we work with, a lot of mavericks out there, high performing people, or doing a lot of stuff. But we know that kind of, for example, the imposter syndrome, that kind of feeling, of being a fraud, or how did I get here, and all that kind of thing, is rife. So you've mentioned a lot of practical techniques that anyone can use. What are a couple of techniques that people could dig into that can help in this area?
Yeah. Well, one very simple to say, a little more difficult to do, is to be yourself, and that starts with making a decision to be yourself. And what comes out of that, the intensity of the decision is so important, because the intensity of the decision will reach deep inside of yourself, and then when you make that decision, it becomes less important, because being yourself, you decide, is so important. You bring it up the ladder, if you like, of importance, and you put it right there near the very top, if not at the top, but very, very right up there. And because you bring it up there in terms of priorities, you're reaching deep inside yourself. You start to become less concerned with what you should be doing and who you should be pleasing, and that is a huge thing for people. And it really comes down to the intensity of a decision. So you've got to find a way of making that decision important. You've got to look at your life and decide for yourself to a really powerful degree that being yourself is an exceptionally important thing. And the intensity of the decision will then determine how much change occurs, because that will determine how far up the ladder you bring that being yourself thing, and how deep inside yourself you reach. And for me, that itself was a huge thing, because the consequence of that was pulling away my dependency of having to have a particular perception. You become less dependent upon people's approval. Dependent upon X, Y, and Z things, and more in touch with that inner resource inside yourself. And it's such a fantastic feeling when it comes, because it feels like freedom. Oh my God, this is really amazing. I don't really care if such and such a person likes me, for example, or I don't really care if X, Y, and Z happens. It doesn't really matter to me as much. And that it's almost like a spiritual awakening of sorts. But it's not really in spiritual terms, but it is really, because being yourself is probably one of the most spiritual things you could ever do. But getting there really can be dependent on the intensity of a decision. And for that, you've got to decide that you've got to absolutely decide that being yourself is of deep, great importance. So that for me was a huge breakthrough. And the other, if I could share another one.
Yeah, please.
The other one, more practical and easier to do, is become aware of your posture. Because how you hold and move your body in varying situations reflects how you feel on the inside. And so if you make corrections and adjustments to your shoulders, how you hold your back, your spine, your face, your neck, all these kind of things, and adjust your posture as if you're wearing an inner sense of worthiness and value, then that will actually feed back into brain circuits. And the more you do that, you actually start to shape these circuits of the brain and literally wire self-love, or this inner sense of worthiness and value, literally wire it into your brain, into your nervous system. And then the feelings that come with that are more of a habit. So I found those two things were huge breakthroughs for me. Just literally working on my posture was very important. How I walk and how I stand, and particularly in certain situations that are challenging, because those are the times when your facial expressions, your shoulders, you lean forward and you you move your shoulders in, your back arches and all these kind of things that reflect maybe worry or stress or fear of people, what people think of you, those kind of things. And so when you change that and stand up straight, if you like, and wear how you want to feel on your body, like how you hold your body, you literally wear it like a Superman cape or a Wonder Woman cape, but you're wearing it on the inside. It literally rewires the circuits of the brain. And that was huge for me as well. So those two main things, being yourself and adjusting my posture, they were, life-changing, really, and in the sense of how powerful they were.
Well, what was really funny then was the moment you said, adjust your posture, I actually sat up in my chair. and it has an immediate effect. I can't stop smiling now. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So a couple of things. I'm just aware of the time we have. So I'm just kind of thinking back to, the start of your journey, as it were. And this has been quite a journey. It really has. If you were looking back now at say your 17-year-old self, you've just done your hires, you're just about to go to university. What advice from your current viewpoint would you give to that younger self, kind of starting out, as it were?
Not to worry so much, because if I could go back, I would say, don't worry, everything's going to work out fine. And it's funny because that's what my papa, my mum's dad used to say to my mum and to me, and my mum would say it to me, like, everything will work out for the best in the end. And I think that has actually been the case. And I have probably wasted a lot of time in my life worrying about whether things will turn out okay. And I think often if you're being yourself, then things have a funny way of turning out okay. So I would go back and say that don't worry so much, because everything will be okay.
Everything will be. Actually, just reminds me of last night. I kind of had a bit of a word, and there's a day book that I read sometimes called Simple Abundance by Sarah Bambranick, and the entry for today is she quotes a saying by Dame Julian of Norwich, who apparently was a 13th century mystic, and it was literally all things will be well, and all things will be well, and all manner of things will be well. Oh. She just uses a mantra in it, so it's right, isn't it? We just thinking all the things you were saying earlier about when your brain gets stuck on something, you need to take yourself away from it. When we get stuck on those problems, of course, and we focus on them, then we're just going to get more problem and stress and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. I think I personally, for a number of years in my life, have wasted so much time in my head, worrying and feeling anxious and stressed and worried about X, Y, and Z things, and there wasn't really much point because it didn't change anything. Right. There wasn't really much point in it, but it's hard to see at the time. But because the question was if I could say to my 17-year-old self, then that's what I would say. Whether my 17-year-old self would believe me or not, it's another matter altogether. But that's what I would say.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. I love that. So just a couple more things. One of the things that we say at Mavericks Unlimited is that we're all about helping Mavericks unleash their superpowers to create a world that works for all. So if you were, I think you already alluded to this earlier, but if you are on your mission to change the world, as it were, what change would you make, and what would your first step be?
Actually a completely off the wall kind of thing. I would abolish money.
Okay.
Right. And I wonder if, and it wouldn't mean people wouldn't have jobs and all. Eventually, I think what would need, that would take a transition, obviously. But people would then be doing things in the world because they want to. No one wants to sit in the house and get bored. So people would actually get out there and do stuff. So we'd find things would change, but things would improve in a lot of ways, and people would be doing the jobs and the roles that they want to do. And you wouldn't need money because you could have anything. If you want to go on holiday to somewhere, then if there's no money and everyone's entitled to do everything and everyone's serving everything, then you can do anything you want. So you've no need for the money. And the first step I would take I'd write a novel about that, like a novel, a really gripping novel about that happening in the world. That would be my first step, because I find writing for me helps to educate and inspire. And so I would write a novel on how that would work.
I love that.
So that people would see how amazing that kind of world could be.
So is that going to be like book number 11 or 12 or something like that?
It's the first time I've thought about it. So
no commitments just yet then.
Yeah. So you never, I would like to, I have a few ideas for novels, but I've never thought of that one, but I would like to write a novel. Definitely like to. It's something that really inspires me, is writing stories, and I've just never tried it before.
Well, the standard of your current writing is fantastic, so I imagine your novel writing would be great. And let's face it, stories reach into us in a way that non-fiction doesn't always.
Yeah.
So my final question for you, Dave, and this is the one I ask all my guests on this podcast, is what is the one question that I haven't asked you that you would like to be asked, and what would your answer be?
What was the one question that I'd like to be asked? God, I have absolutely no idea.
I should always kind of give that one before we start the interview, because it always flummoxes people.
What would I like to be asked? I could give a really boring question, but it'd be something to do with what kind of person am I, or what do I believe about the nature of reality, or something. And what I would say then is that each of us are pure consciousness, and the body that we seem to wear is just something that you wear, but it's not who you are. That there's an essence of pure consciousness, like a light, if you like, if you could see it, that each of us are. And each of us exist in infinite different varieties and forms and colours, and we perceive each other not as their real self, but as just a colour or a variety that fits in with the story that we've got running at the time in our own experience of life. And right. So what you see around you, it bears absolutely no resemblance to actual reality. It's just a construct, if you like. And so that's if I was asked the question, what do I really believe, then that's what I believe. And that which you are is infinite, is pure consciousness, the essence of which is, I guess people have said it sounds really boring, but love, meaning the essence of it is it's all part of the one thing.
Yeah.
And it's deep interconnectedness and sense of relationship is the essence of it all, in which case, therefore, it can only come down to the feelings between it is love and compassion and kindness, I think. So that's what I believe. That's the question I suppose I'd like to be asked, and that would be my answer.
I love that as an answer, and that is a wonderful way for us to end today, as it were. David, it has been an absolute pleasure, I have to say. I could literally sit and talk to you for hours.
It's been a great conversation.
It really, really, really has. And, I'm going to preempt this by saying at some point I would love to get you on again if you'd be up for that. And maybe...
Oh, absolutely.
Do maybe I don't know, Tim Ferriss does these talks with experts where he'll like chat with them for a couple of hours kind of thing, and like really get deep and all that. So if you would be up for a Tim Ferriss kind of conversation, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
So there you go, Mavericks. We have had the pleasure of Dr. David Hamilton with us today. Once again, David, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure too.
And Mavericks, we'll look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. We'll see you next time. Hey, listen up. Don't go yet. Did you get something meaningful out of this episode? Well, the most meaningful thing that you can do right now is to go and leave a review on iTunes, because those reviews are what keep us here. And please make sure to share and to subscribe to this podcast. Finally, are you unleashing your superpowers? Well, if so, show us on Instagram with the hashtag Mavericks Unlimited, and we'll see you over there. And with that, thanks so much for listening to the Mavericks Unlimited podcast at mavericsunlimited.com. Bye for now.